Oh, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Vamily Show, Season 2, Episode 38. Today with me, I have Marci Brockmann, and you're the author of a book, and you just got it released um,
July.
per- in July, Permission to Land.
Right.
And I was kind of listening to your life's story that you went over on one of your videos on your YouTube channel, What's Up Marci, and I kind of wanted to know. It kind of sounded like this book was the culmination of everything up into your life at this point in time. Advice for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that far too many of us are in relationships or have been in relationships that don't serve us. You know, we're in relationships with people who are addicts or relationships with people who are narcissistic. And I read a study once. I wish I'd saved it. That far many more people that we meet are fit in the narcissistic spectrum than the social scientist who was doing the experiment ever imagined. So everybody that I talked to was like, oh my God, I had the same kind of thing, or my mom was the same way, or my ex-husband was the same way, or my wife was the same way. And throughout, I've been teaching high school English for 25 years. And part of the most fun part of my job, the most meaningful part of my job, is to be able to connect on a very human level with my students through sharing stories. And I'm more than just the person who grades their essays, but, I have also had similar experiences. And through my wisdom, if you will, having lived this life experience, I have quite a bit that I can share with them to help them feel like they're less alone in the world. And I think that universally, that's the kind of, that's what I hope that people will get out of reading this book.
Mm-hmm. And Papa Papa Drew is asking, is this about dating? Not this book in particular.
Well, there are chapters about dating. There are chapters about dating.
You have written on dating as well, though, in the past as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an occasional columnist for the Elephant Journal, and I've written some stuff about dating and so on in there. And there are chapters within the memoir itself where I talk about dating as a high school student, as a college student, and dating in my 20s until I met my ex-husband, and then how different the whole dating experience was when I was a 40-something single after a 12-year disaster marriage. What that was like. Right. Meeting people online, meeting people where I went, wherever I would go. And there's one chapter called Catfished where I talked about how I met a guy online and he represented himself at one way and the reality of who he was completely different than it was before, than I knew. And I learned a lot about myself through that relationship. So I can't say that I wish I had never met Stuart, but, yeah, I hope his daughters are treated better by men than he treats women. That's all I can say.
Right. And I was going to kind of ask you about that because when you were talking about your life story, you had, and I had experience with this myself. You had a let's say difficult mother, to say the least. And would you say, for the most part, most people end up trying to emulate, even if they hated their parents' relationship or whatever, their brain somehow ends up emulating and wanting to find that as a relationship because that was the example they saw?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. I think that mental illness is an intergenerational disease, and that if you grew up with a certain template for behavior patterns or relationship patterns, that it's very easy to fall into that when you're establishing your own adult relationships because they feel comfortable to you fitting into that old toxic template that you're not really seeing as toxic because it's really just all that you know. Mm-hmm. But I think that my mother's behavior she was a bipolar and she was a narcissist and she was an opiate drug addict. So it was like the perfect storm of of personality cataclysm. Like one day, one moment, she could be generous and sweet and loving and Mary Poppins like, and the next moment she could turn on a dime without any notice, and suddenly she's Cruella de Vil.
Right.
And as an only child, as her daughter, I, as a kid, so I internalized the flip-flop as my fault, because what do I know? And so I would do whatever I could to make my mother feel better, or my attempt at making my mother feel better. And I don't think I ever succeeded, because you really can't, you can assuage somebody in a moment, but you can't ever really affect any change in anyone's life except your own. And as a kid, I didn't know this. And so I grew up being a people pleaser. I sublimated everything that I ever felt and all my own desires and all my own emotions, because I didn't really feel like, if my mom, who I loved, was upset or hurting or angry or whatever, I didn't feel like I deserved the love and the comfort and the safety that I really did deserve, because I wasn't doing enough to make her happy. And obviously, if she wasn't happy, it was my fault.
Right.
So if you take an empathetic person like me and give her to a narcissistic mother, it's like the perfect, feeds in on itself. And so I internalized that people-pleasing part and sublimating my own needs to be what I considered a relationship. And so every guy that I dated, including my first husband, I followed those same relationship patterns. And I could not figure out, for the life of me, why I was miserable. Why were people treating me like crap? Why was I never getting my needs met? Why was I afraid to even assert and tell anyone what my needs were? I mean, that's a huge thing. No one's a mind reader. And just because I feel like I needed to be loved a certain way, or I felt that X, Y, and Z should be part of our relationship, doesn't mean that my husband should be responsible for knowing that, unless I'm willing to tell him. But I was afraid to.
Right.
So it was a disaster for both of us. And he had his own relationship templates from his own parents that were different from mine, but that set him up with what he knew how to do. And it really wasn't working at all.
So it's kind of like it was almost doomed from the start, just because of that.
Oh, it totally was. I knew it was wrong when we were still dating, before we even got married. My therapist, and therapists, if you've ever been in therapy, that talk, cognitive behavioral therapy, takes a long time, because the therapist sort of sets up certain the scenario so that you're figuring out yourself. You ask a question, why do I always keep doing that? And the therapist is like, well, why do you think that you're doing that? So they lead you to find the answer yourself. They don't ever really ever tell you exactly what to do, But I had this one therapist who I was seeing shortly before we got engaged, who said to me, okay, I'm breaking every rule here, but you need to break up with him. I want you to go home. We were living together at the time. Go home, pack. And if you have to move back in with your parents until you can find a place of your own, go do that. Do not marry him. But I did anyway. I don't know. I mean, I got 2 wonderful kids out of it, so I can't regret it. You just can't go back in time and regret that. So, I got out when I got out.
That you had the therapist and the voice inside of you telling you something, and you kind of talked about that. Did it, because of your experience, do you think when you're younger, it took you a lot longer to trust even the voice that's in yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't trust my own voice. That's a good point. I really didn't trust my own voice. And I don't really know why. I didn't. I think it goes back to that people-pleasing thing, because I didn't really feel like I was worthy of having what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back at that old me who felt that way, and all I can feel now is just compassion for her. She was trying her best and didn't have the tools to do what she needed and to go get what she needed. And so as a parent, I have a 19-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son. And most of their childhoods I was a single mom, and she was sharing parenting with the ex-husband, and that was another dicey mess. But I spent their lives doing my level best to combat all of that, to make sure that they knew that they were worthy of love and belonging, and that they were valued, and their opinions and desires mattered more than anything else. And that if they wanted to do something in this world and had to disappoint somebody in order to do it, I wanted me to be the one who was disappointed. I don't ever want you to disappoint yourself. You know, if you feel like, you have to go do something and you think that I'm going to be disappointed that you go do it, but it is something that you need to do in your soul, then you go do that and leave me to deal with my own feelings. You know what I mean? You're not responsible for how anyone else feels or anybody else's reaction to what it is you're doing, as long as you're living your authentic self and doing what you in your heart believe is right for you, then go do that. You don't need anyone else's permission, which is where the title of the book came from, Permission to Land. You don't need anyone else's permission to be you, to love yourself, to respect yourself, to know how you want to be loved and how you need to be loved, and how you want to go get your dreams, live your dreams. You want to raise cows, go raise cows. You want to fly a plane, go fly a plane. You want to get married and have 19 children, then go ahead and do that. You don't need anyone else's permission. Just do it.
Right.
You know.
Just get out there and live life. And
exactly. Yeah. Carl Jung once said that the something like the most unfortunate thing for a child is the unlived life of a parent. So, if I don't go out and fulfill my dreams because I feel guilty about taking my time away from my kids, or I don't feel like I deserve a bigger dream, or I'm afraid in some way, then I might put that disappointment on my life onto my children, and try to live vicariously through them in a way that isn't fair to who they want to be.
I wanted to be a rock star, so you're going to practice.
Exactly. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's a practice that we all have to do on a regular basis, and an ongoing thing as we're raising our kids, to make sure that we have conversations with them about what they want to do, and that they're entitled to go do what they want to do, and how to go about making it happen. What are you doing today to further your dream? Are you ignoring it and hoping that it's just going to happen as a miracle, or are you going to putting in the 10,000 hours, the blood, sweat, and tears to make it happen? And figuring out what you want is a terribly hard thing to do in this world. So, some people know from the beginning of their lives. My son knew from the time he was 5, playing with Legos, that he wanted to be an engineer. And that's what he is. My daughter is a little bit more like me, and she's got a lot of ideas and a lot of passion, a lot of talent, but not a whole heck of a lot of direction as to how we're going to use that, So I'm helping her try to figure that out. But that's something that my parents never did.
Mom, though, because since you know that's the way she is, it's fair that you're her mom, so that you can guide her through that stuff.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah. Yeah, that's what we hope, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Because I'm sure, with the way your mom was, she couldn't be there to help you, like that. And I heard at one point where you said you sent her a FedEx letter. I was like, wow, man, wow, it got to that point.
Yeah, well, she was in a very steep downward spiral there at the end of 2011 and the beginning of 2012, and the drugs were completely taken over her personality. There were very few shreds of the woman she was left, and she had decided, I'm going to try to condense this because it's a long story. She had decided she wanted to come over and bake cookies and play board games with my kids and I. And this was, not 9 years ago. So 8 years ago. So my kids were, much younger than they are now. And she didn't show up, which was typical for her. She'd make an appointment. She'd say, I'm definitely coming. I'm so excited. And then she wouldn't show up because she took some drugs and passed out. And that was the end of that. So this one particular day, she came over 4 hours late. But, I had an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old or something like that. And we're not, if we're expecting you at 6, we're not waiting until 10 to first start any of this. So we had already done all of the activities that we had planned, and she showed up 4 hours late, mad as all hell, screaming, violent, had become like this other demonic version of herself, blaming me, like, and she was screaming at my kids and telling them that they were ungrateful and that they should be kissing her feet and all that. Like, she was off the hook. And my kids ran into my daughter's room and locked the door, and they were crying. And it was like, at that moment, I stopped thinking of my relationship with her before my relationship with my kids. So I stopped being the dutiful daughter first, and I became the responsible mom first. And it was like a light switch. And I threw her and my stepdad out of the house. I'm like, you are not welcome here anymore unless your attitude changes, unless the drugs go away. And she was screaming at me like the top of her lungs, like it was the most venomous Jerry Springer episode from my front lawn. And I just said, you have to leave. And I closed the door. And I dealt with my kids and I calmed them down. And then I had a horrible stress-induced asthma attack, and I cried and I didn't know what the hell to do. And, for me, my own personal therapy is writing. I've been keeping journals since 1984. And so I started writing, and what I was writing, I figured out, was a letter to my mom. And I went through our entire relationship from when I was a kid and what her narcissistic behavior did to me. Not that I was necessarily blaming her, but trying to explain from my perspective what was going on. And I said that I loved her and that I always would love her, but that I had to protect my kids. And unless she decided to let me help her find drug treatment, counseling, inpatient, in a hospital, I would be with her every single day for the rest of her life, helping her through that. She would never be alone. But if she decided to ignore the drug problem, because that's really the worst part of it. I could deal with the narcissism as a grown-up. I could deal with her narcissism and her selfishness, but addiction I could not stomach.
Right.
And so I said, either you go into rehab and I'll be there every single day of your life, or if you decide not to and you're going to stay with the drugs, you can never see us again. And I wasn't sure if it was compassionate enough or if I was being too hard-ass or whatever. So I sent it to her best friend, who I had grown up with as my aunt. And she read it and she said, no, it's absolutely perfect. I wouldn't change a word. So I FedExed it. Like you said, I FedExed it to my mother because I didn't want her to say, well, I didn't get a letter from you. This way I had Federal Express with her signature saying, yeah, you did. And then she could look at it. She couldn't dismiss me out of hand and just not listen to what I was saying. She had a tangible piece of paper she could read and at her leisure keep going back to it if she got too angry to continue reading. And a couple of times she tried to call me, and my aunt had given me the heads up that my mother was going to call because she was pissed as all get out. She's an English teacher. She doesn't know. She's not a doctor. She doesn't know. Yeah, I do know. Yeah, I do know. And then after those angry phone calls stopped, I never spoke to her again. And the next time I saw her, she was in her coffin in October of 2013.
Wow.
And that was that. So, and then I was the only one who had to, the only one who was willing to eulogize her. Her best friend, her husband, her sister, nobody would stand up and say a damn word. And so here, I'm the only one who was shut out of her life. And I'm the only one who all of this affected directly. And yet it was up to me to give the woman a respectful eulogy.
Wow.
Which I did, but,
Wow.
you have to be a creative writer sometimes.
Right. At least you had experience doing that.
Right.
I kind of want to know, being a teacher, what are some lessons that you've learned from your students that have really helped you out in life and maybe with your own children as they've grown up?
That's a very good question. So I started teaching in 1995, 1994, before I was a kid, before I was a mom, before I was married. And I've always been able to connect with my students. And because I wasn't their parent, but I was a trusted adult, they always saw me as cool. you know,
Right.
oh, that's cool, Mrs. Brockmann, you know, we can hang out with her. We can tell her anything. Because I don't embarrass, and kids can say anything, and I'm completely non-judgmental and fine. And I expected my own children to be that way with me too. But no, that doesn't work. I'm mom, so it doesn't matter. I'm cool Mrs. Brockmann at school. At home, I'm just dorky mom. But I think that having had 20 some odd years of experience with teenagers, when my own kids were teenagers, I knew better how to be consistent and set limits. And I was comfortable with them hating me on occasion when I was doing something out of tough love that was good for them.
Right.
You know, I'm a fervent believer that if you are the parent of a teenager and they don't hate you on occasion, you're doing something wrong. You know, if you're always their best friend, they're not learning boundaries and limits and right from wrong and time of place and all sorts of things and respect, and there are all sorts of things that they should be learning from their parents. And I think that's where a lot of parents go wrong, is that they're not consistent, and they're too worried about their kids' approval to actually do what their kid needs. Right. And I think that between my students over the years and their parents and talking to their parents about the kids' behavior in my class and in life, etc., I think that's what I figured out, and it taught me to be a better mom in that regard.
Right. And I can understand that completely. It kind of give you a little bit of the extra insight to know maybe when something's going on or whatever too, because you can recognize it when kids have done it before. So
yeah, and I had an unending resource for teenagers. So if I had an argument with my son or there was some issue with my daughter, I'd go into class and I'd say, okay, guys, this is what happened. This is what my daughter said. This is what my son said. This is what's going on here, you know,
right.
or I don't understand what they said, or why are they, and my teenage students would help me decode the issue that was going on with my own children. And I was able to attack a problem from a different way, from a different angle, or show them more understanding than I would have of a different generation kind of thing. You know, like, right. Why would that be so important? Or, you know, whatever it was. I can't really even think of an example, but
right.
I think you get
right.
it.
And it's easy to stay up on probably keep up on lingo as it changes too, being a teacher right. of that age as well. So that probably helps as well. And I kind of want to know, is there a teacher from your past that helped form the teacher you became? Like you kind of
when you absolutely. Were younger? Absolutely. There are three right off the bat that I actually write about in my book. I had an 11th grade English teacher, Elizabeth Simmons, who was a consummate professional. Like, she was always on target and on point with her lessons. And we read literature that I loved, that I now teach, and I've been teaching for a long time. But the thing that was the most amazing about her is that she really took the time to get to know who her students were. And there were, you know, I had her in 11th grade. So my parents were in the middle of their crazy divorce, and they were being vindictive, awful, horrible people to each other, and weaponizing me to get back at each other. It was a disaster time in my life personally. And I was just an awkward, shy, like, kid. I mean, I was boy troubles and teenage angst and all that stuff on top of it. And there was one particular day that I came to school very upset, and I didn't think anybody knew. And she asked me to stay after class. And of course, I was always an A student, so I was not the type that the teacher would ever say, you know, could you stay after class? So I was petrified. But she said she noticed a change of expression and a change of energy in me and wanted to know if things were okay. And it opened up a whole dialogue that we then became closer, because I realized that I could trust her and that she could read me. She saw me. And it is such a powerful thing to have somebody to actually see you.
Right.
And we had a relationship. She would talk to me about stuff, age appropriate, just theater tickets with her husband or whatever. But she would always ask me really pointed questions about my life, and always would just let me vent if I needed to. She was phenomenal. And then I had a 12th grade psychology teacher. It was actually a social studies teacher in my high school, and she was a tiny class, so we all sat in a circle, and she would sit on the back of a student's desk and like face us, and she would just chat with us. And she was teaching the curriculum, but it was psychology, so you have to talk about relationships and personalities and so on. And she was just so in it and invested and interested and wanted that human storytelling, give and take with her students. That just was like, yeah, that's how that job is done,
Right.
And then the third one was my high school band teacher, who I was petrified of in the very beginning of 9th grade. And he was the teacher for 4 years because he was the only one who handled band. And I loved him. I was terrified of him in the beginning. And then very quickly, I realized that he was just a teddy bear. He was very strict about practicing and knowing our pieces, and, you're only as good as your last performance kind of thing, and instilled this very keen work ethic in me. But he just had this open door policy where I could just come and collapse on his desk, not literally, metaphorically. And he just helped me put my life back together, and was like my therapist before I actually had gone to therapy. And I adored him. He was wonderful. And then another weird piece of that is 20 years later, I'm teaching in the high school where I teach here on Long Island, and I'm sitting on a desk in the hall doing hall duty, and walking up the same hallway from the music wing, which was down at the end of the other hallway, is Peter Brash, my high school band teacher. And I took a double take, like, he looked exactly the same. And he walked over to me and he's like, "Oh my God, Marci, you look exactly the same. Why are you here?" And I'm like, "Why am I here? Why are you here?" And he was retired from public school teaching and was overseeing student teachers who were in the band, student band director teachers through SUNY Potsdam College. State University of New York at Potsdam has a big music school. And so he was overseeing student teachers on Long Island at a bunch of different high schools, and was like tickled pink that was the school where I taught. And so we met for coffee a couple of times, and it was this whole like full circle of our relationship. It was just one of those meant to be moments. It was very cool.
Yeah, it's really neat to have that happen, and to go from the student teacher to starting to be peers there, when you're starting to learn to teach.
Yeah, he was Pete now, not Mr. Brash,
Right. Is there if you could go back to that student teacher and tell her your life, how it ended up to now, would you believe yourself of how it went, and that you've written?
Oh, I would totally tell her. Elizabeth Simmons? Yeah, I would totally tell her.
No, I'm talking about you yourself. You can go back in time and go back to you as a student teacher and tell yourself everything that's happened from then till now. Would you believe yourself of what has happened?
Probably not. Now that I understand your question, I had my part of the book it goes through my entire circuitous, very convoluted career path. And I had gone through 6 or 7 very different career choices in a very short period of time, because I kept getting bored by what I was doing, or somehow philosophically disillusioned by what I was doing. And I've always been one of these people who not only needs to do a job to put some food on the table and pay for my life, but I need to feel like what I'm doing is making the world better, and that I'm getting some meaning out of it. And so I did a bunch of jobs that were things that I wanted to do, things that I had some talent at doing, but I got bored really fast. And they're great jobs for other people, but for me, it just wasn't a good fit. And so when I came to teaching, it was like the 8th job in 7 years. And I thought, well, I haven't stuck around for anything for more than 6 to 12 months. I'm not sure. Of course, I had just finished a master's program in order to get credentialed in order to be a teacher. So I just invested 2 years in, or a year and a half in actually becoming a teacher. So I had a little more invested than just getting, applying for a job. But I figured, yeah, I love this, but who's to say in 5 years or 10 years, I'm still going to be doing it? Like when I first started teaching in 1995, I really didn't think I'd make it 5 or 6 years. And then I would have to move on and do something else. And the biggest surprise of my life, or one of them, is that it's literally, I'm starting my 26th year doing this now, and I'm not bored yet.
Wow.
If I could be teaching the way I've always been teaching, I would be happier than a clam right now. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so we're now doing this very strange hybrid thing where some kids come some days and some kids come to school other days. And when they're not physically in school, they're meeting like you and I are meeting through the computer. Right. But because the school district didn't want to, well, we were understaffed on the high school level and they didn't want to pay more teachers. I'm actually teaching the same 5 classes, the same 125 students that I normally teach, but I'm teaching live kids in my classroom and live kids in a streaming thing at the same time with 3 computers on my desk so that I can get audio working, and it's like impossible. I'm tech savvy and I'm having trouble. So I don't know. I don't think this is doing good service to the kids in my room, and I don't think it's doing good service to the kids who are web streaming in. But it is what it is right now. Right. We only can do what we can do. So we're taking each day as it comes, and I think the kids know that, and they're not getting impatient or irritated or anything. So,
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it seems. Oh man, it seems like it's gonna be almost like because 9/11 happened right after I turned 18, and so this seems like it's gonna be like almost a defining moment for kids that are right around that age in high school.
Absolutely.
And so, are you kind of cognizant of that? And
oh, absolutely. This is the generation that grew up with school shootings. Right. This is the generation that grew up with not only fire drills and bus drills, but school shooter drills and lockdown drills and lockout drills. And, I don't think they go a week in school without thinking about this in some way. Like our school had policies about people wearing badges and IDs, and all the doors were locked, and you could only come in certain doors and go out other doors. And we practiced where to stand out of the sight lines of the classroom window, the doors in the classroom, the windows in the doors of the classroom. And we had to be quiet, and you weren't allowed out unless a police officer would let you out, or, a school resource officer or something. And like, there was all of these things. And we had a situation years ago where there was an active shooter in our parking lot, and school was locked down for hours. For 3 or 4 hours, we were hiding in our classrooms waiting for what happened, and nobody was hurt, and everything wound up being fine, and the guy was arrested, and that was the end of that. But this shit's real, Yeah. And so they are already facing trauma from that. I mean, they weren't alive during 9/11, none of these students. My daughter, who's 19, was only 6 months old. So my high school students weren't even born yet. So they've grown up in a time in the world where the United States has been at war since before they were born in some way or another. Yeah. And with, whatever people's position for gun control is, I mean, I don't want to politicize any of this, but too many people who, without the mental capacity to be trusted with a gun, have a gun. And we have situations like this where kids have to grow up with PTSD and trauma-induced anxiety because they don't know what's going to happen in their schools or their malls or their concerts that they go to. Or it seems like, like for a grown up, like I remember times where we were at peace, and it has never really, until I was an adult, it didn't really affect me. So
Yeah.
my psychology about it is different. But these kids grow up, and in one way or another, they're all anxious and have psychological effects of trauma because of their upbringing. And so now they're in high school or middle school, or like my nephews, or beginning elementary school, and people were wearing masks, and we're staying far away from each other, and the classroom doors are open and the windows are open. And we spent 6 months hiding in our houses. We live in New York, was one of the biggest epicenters of the whole pandemic in the spring and the early part of the summer. And nobody was going anywhere. I mean, it was just surreal. I would never, if you had said to me, this is what we would all be doing now back in January, I wouldn't have believed you.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And it's hitting everywhere, the whole entire world. And without our health, we got nothing. So that has to be first. Healthcare and helping the sick and controlling the spread has to be number one, above the economy and above education, because none of it's worth anything if we're all dead.
Right. And you probably touch on the health stuff a lot in your book too.
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah. I talk about my mom's healthcare and mental health care and my own, and somewhat what my experience of aging as a female, and all the things that entails, and stuff like that.
Right.
And healthcare as a parent, like my daughter had a very minor congenital malformation when she was born. And so I talked about in the book, I talked about how I dealt with that and finding her specialists and doctors and tests and whatever to fix it and make it better. And luckily, knock wood, she was fine. But what I decided when I realized that I had enough stories here, and that what I was working on was actually viable to be a book, because I wasn't really sure at first. I took people on the journey of my life in a way that I think is very relatable. Like I start with that fight that I had with my mom, and her death and her funeral. And then I went back to my childhood, and then brought my experience chronologically through my life, through growing up and my college experience and dating and my ex-husband and children and parenting and jobs and careers, etc. And then my divorce, and then dating in my 40s and what that was like. And then dating, being a mom to teenagers and then adult children, and the roles friendship has had in my life. And all along, not only just relating what myself as a 52-year-old remembers about things that happened 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago in my life, but I used my 30 some odd years of journal entries as like first, I forget what the term that I'm looking for is, but like first line documents. So that I could literally go back and quote myself. Okay, so yes, this thing happened when I was 17, but that was so long ago. Who's going to trust my memory? But I can quote myself from my journal. This is what I said when I was 17. Right. And so I was really very cognizant, very conscious and aware of being as hard, if not harder, on myself than I was on anyone else. So if I was going to judge my mom's behavior, I was also going to judge mine. If I was going to judge my dad's behavior, I was also telling the shitty things I did as a 20-year-old, or, to avoid issues, or, I've always been sort of conflict avoidance. And so it goes back to not being able to voice what I wanted to say or voice my own needs. And so I would avoid the conflict and then do the passive aggressive cowardly thing, right, because I didn't want to say, okay, Bob, this is how I feel. Like you hurt my feelings and I don't want to do that. I want to do this. I would never say that. But when I was 20, I might think it, I might write about it, And then even though you and I agreed on whatever it was, I would, when you weren't looking, go do the thing I wanted, even if it pissed you off. And I was trying so desperately to make it all work and to be the best me I could be, but I was failing in a lot of ways. And I think I know I tried to present that whole picture, you know, like even when I got remarried to my husband, Michael, we've been married for 3.5 years. He was a friend of mine that I had met in 1987 in college. And we'd known each other for 29 years before we started dating. And it's been like a movie romance since then with him. But I was also very clear to say, but it's not always like that. You know, like this is what it looks like in broad strokes. But, you know, he's got 2 kids and I've got 2 kids. And yes, they're all adults, but that in itself is messy. And he's got 4 grandkids. And then how does that fit in? And, you know, and his daughter's ex-husband and her domestic violence. And, you know, like it's not easy. My family dynamics with my dad and my stepmom and my stepsisters and the baggage from my mom and her side of the family. Like, so no matter how romantic somebody's love story could be, it's still humans and our lives are messy. And it's the messy stuff that makes life interesting. You know, it makes you appreciate the rose petals and the moonbeams, you know, and the good loving days and the romance. You know, you don't appreciate that unless you've also got the messy stuff too. So I'm hoping people will read it, and I'm hoping that people will get something out of it. They'll feel like they're a little less alone in dealing with all of the trauma and craziness that life throws at us all.
Yeah.
And through some of the lessons that I've learned, hard won from my own life experience and from over 30 years in therapy, maybe it'll help, you know. That's kind of the purpose.
That's the best you can hope for sure is somebody, at least one person out there gets something out of it. And I think it's a good story that you shared. And you know, anybody that listens to this, you can check out her website, marcibrockmann.com. Also, she has a YouTube channel filled with a bunch of stuff called What's Up Marci. And the links for all of her stuff are in the description on Facebook as well, LinkedIn, everywhere. You can check her out and check out all of her stuff because, you know, she's got stories to share and she's here to help you out. And
Thanks.
and be a teacher, not just to kids, but to all of us in some way, I think, for sure. And has there been anybody that's read any of your work before and has been helped out with it in the past?
Yeah, I've actually gotten a few emails from people who've read the letter, who've read the book, and loved that they were able to remember and imagine their own lives and their own experiences having similar things, and found my book inspiring or uplifting and cathartic to them. You know, a couple of friends who are older than me, a couple of friends that are my age. I've had a few former students read it. And one of my former students works at a local library here. And he's like, it's now my favorite book. And it's not just because you wrote it. It's my favorite book. And he made sure that the library bought it and they put it in their adult collection. And yeah, it's cool. I like seeing myself in the card catalog of a library, you know.
Yeah.
It's fun. But to that end of helping people, I actually published a second book this summer, which is a companion journal to the memoir called Permission to Land: Personal Transformation Through Writing. And so I've taken a lot of the questions that I asked myself while writing the memoir, and I've created the same type of journey for other people through writing prompts. Over 100 pages of writing prompts to literally pull them through their own life and inspire them to do the same remembering and excavation and reminiscences and growth that I went through. I mean, because truth be told, even if I didn't ever sell a copy of this book, it was so worth writing for me because of how much more empathy and love I have for myself.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's been like a life-changing experience for me. And so it's like a bonus that other people are reading it and finding that the same experience with themselves. And so all the books are on sale wherever books are sold. So
awesome. And that writing companion journal, that may spawn who knows how many books of people. They get through writing that and they're like, well, I could write a book about what's went on in my life now that I look at all I wrote in here.
exactly. And even if they don't want to publish it, if they're courageous enough to be vulnerable enough to share what they're writing with other people, a spouse, a best friend, a loved one, a child, or whatever, I think that answering these questions and answering them with other people can help enrich our own intimacy and vulnerability and relationships with the people we care about, and intensify and make the relationships more real and authentic. A bunch of years ago, there was 4 or 5 years ago in the New York Times, there was an article written that was like the 36 questions, or ask and answer these 36 questions with somebody and you'll fall in love by the end. It was kind of an experiment. And they took strangers and locked them in a room and said, you have to ask and answer as honestly as possible, all 36 questions with each other and have conversations about it. And by and large, by the time the 36th question was finished, the people were either best friends or they had fallen in love.
Wow.
It was very strange, very interesting. So on the first vacation I ever took with my current husband, I brought this article with us and we answered and answered all of these questions, and it worked. So I think my journal can kind of do the same thing, right. For people, get a copy and you each answer it on your own and then come back in and chat with each other about it. And we can't go to the movies or eat in restaurants right now, so we might as well do that.
Might as well do something productive for sure.
Yeah.
And that's more productive than watching another show on Netflix. That's for sure.
Right. Exactly.
So, I do want to thank you for being here today. And
my pleasure. This was fun.
Like I always say to everybody here in the audience, stop waiting for life to happen and make life happen.